Typically, when you think of Fae, fairies, satyrs, hags, and the like come to mind. Creatures known for their chaotic nature, strange powers, and alien morals. But strangely enough, the most popular Fae, the one that is indisputably used at the most tables, doesn't really seem to fit this concept. That Fae is goblins. Goblins are the quintessential early game creatures that players mow through at the start of a campaign. Sometimes a DM might make them a silly little guy with a fun voice, but generally, at most tables, they are just treated like pests. And until the recent 5.5 update, they weren't even technically Fae. This is the final day of Monster Week 2026, where Jenny D and Pointy Hat have rallied the community to take a close look at all things Fae. In this video, I'll be breaking down what goblins are like in D&D, what goblins originally were in the folklore that is the basis for all Fae, and give you the tools to run amazing games using both, so that we can reignite the Fae-ness of D&D's most popular Fae. Welcome to Narrative Nuances. You can call me Narrator. I'm a full-time dungeon master, former teacher, and a potential patron for anyone looking to make a pact of the tome. All you have to do is hit that subscribe button. You gain knowledge, I get another warlock. Not a bad deal for the price. D&D has treated goblins as nothing more than a simple monster for a long time. In most editions, they were considered humanoids at best. They're often clumped into a subcategory with hobgoblins and bugbears, known as goblinoids. Goblins were often framed as this perfect DM tool for presenting an alternative to bandits that could be slaughtered essentially guilt-free. After all, it wasn't like these were people, they were goblins. Killing them was objectively good because they would always kill and pillage. In 2024, this has changed only slightly. Goblins, like any good Fae, just don't make sense to us at first glance. The first thing the Monster Manual says about goblins in 2024 is that they are the Feywild embodiments of recklessness and ruin. It honestly does a great job of doing exactly what you should do to effectively use a Fae. It clearly identifies one of their traits and focuses on how that trait can create an interesting conflict. The Monster Manual presents goblins as these chaotic, energetic creatures who conduct disruptive plots as much for the enjoyment as for any practical reason. But weirdly, that is immediately followed by this description that makes them seem like a more compliant creature. By compliant, I mean needing direction from a leader, a tribe, or some outside influence. The Monster Manual says goblins obey those who accomplish the wildest plans. Such leaders command ornery groups of goblins. This compliant aspect of them is even reinforced by the goblin boss's redirect attack feature in their stat block. It seems like there's a contradiction here. Goblins' nature seems to drive them to want to be these chaotic, disruptive things, but also be compliant, to look for some bigger, stronger, smarter creature to give them some sort of direction and lead the tribe. Hobgoblins, on the other hand, are presented a completely different way. The manual says hobgoblins embody the primal urge to grow and spread. At first, this seems similar to goblins. Both go out and raid, but there's a subtle difference that is easy to miss here. Hobgoblins form hierarchical, martial societies bent on conquering lands and stripping them of resources to serve their expansionist zeal. Unlike regular goblins, hobgoblins aren't disruptive, they are supportive. I know that sounds a little stupid when faced with descriptions like hobgoblins often subjugate animals, monsters, and destructive Fae, particularly goblins and bugbears, to serve their plans. But hobgoblins don't need a bully to order them around. They form hierarchical military societies because supporting the group, complying with the tribe, is their instinct. Hobgoblins have that same compliant nature goblins do, but rather than being disruptive, ornery creatures that have to be forced to comply, hobgoblins support the tribe by falling in line and complying with orders. Between these two goblinoids, there seems to be a common thread. Goblins and hobgoblins both naturally seek someone or something to give them orders or directions. Now that we've established what goblinoids are in D&D, and that until recently they didn't really touch on the Fae aspect of goblinoids at all, let's look at them again, but instead look at their origins in fairy tales and traditional folklore. The folklore hobgoblin was practically nothing like its D&D counterpart. They were often referred to as simply Hobs, essentially meaning hearth, which was the central fireplace in most homes and is the symbol of home and comfort and family life. These Hobs were actually helpful Fae creatures that would find a household and, while they slept at night, do their work. They'd churn butter, sweep the floor, or even mend their shoes. The homeowner would leave out a bowl of cream or fresh baked bread by the fireplace as an acknowledgement of the Hob's helpful meddling. But it was very important to never actually pay or reward the Hob because they'd see this as an insult. A famous piece of Hob folklore is one where a family leaves out a cloak for their helpful Hob. Later that night, the Hob picks up the cloak and cries out in anger before vanishing forever. The Hob of folklore reveals something really interesting. Supporting others is what Hobs do by nature, but they do it without being asked. They don't want the expectation, the rules. They want to be supportive, but they don't want it if it's something that's expected or taken for granted. Hobs are still goblinoids, but rather than being compliant with expectations like their D&D hobgoblin counterparts, Hobs want to meddle. They want to interfere with others, explicitly when others don't want them to. The goblins of folklore, which I'll call Gobs for clarity, were entirely different from both goblins in D&D and Hobs from folklore. They're still a Fae associated with human homes, but malicious. Not evil in the way we think of evil, more annoying. Folklore Gobs would spoil milk, tangle horses' manes, hide your keys. Heck, move your furniture 3 inches to the left so you stub your toe. or at worst, lead travelers astray at night, turning the path so you walk in circles until dawn. They weren't malicious, just tricksters that loved to meddle in your affairs. A famous Gob piece of folklore tells the story of a woman who found a pot of gold on the road and started dragging it home. Each time she tried to figure out what to do with this treasure, it had changed into something cheaper when she looked back at it. The gold to silver, then iron, and then a rock, and finally, it turned into a goblin that laughed and ran off, leaving the woman unharmed and relatively amused. This is what Gobs were known for, meddling in your day-to-day life and being disruptive, but not harmful. When you were dealing with a supportive Hob, you'd leave out cream and bread for them to take so that they'd want to stay without explicitly paying them, kind of tricking them into liking the place. But for the disruptive Gobs, you'd probably leave out cream and milk to make them feel welcome, make them feel like you wanted them there, so that they would go play their pranks on someone who they thought didn't want them there. In folklore, goblinoids were creatures that meddled in your affairs. They specifically wanted to be where they weren't invited or expected. That is their nature. Hobs are still supportive, like hobgoblins, and Gobs are still disruptive, like goblins, and both Hobs and Gobs go where they aren't invited. The way these Hobs and Gobs became the goblins and hobgoblins of today is due to the way Europe changed as Christianity grew. Fae were seen as demons and devils by the church, and calling something a goblin was tantamount to calling it an evil spirit. So, over time, goblinoids went from being helpful at best and amusing tricksters at worst to becoming synonymous with causing problems and misbehaving. If you've ever heard someone call a misbehaving child a little goblin, basically like them calling them a devil, a monster, or a changeling, or kind of all three at once. I just hate how different their origins are from D&D. You know, it kind of sucks how much D&D goblinoids are different than their folktale origins. Goblins have changed so much that they are basically different creatures altogether. There's no way for it to make sense to have Hobs and Gobs in the same setting as goblins and hobgoblins. Except, you can see a bit of what goblinoids would become when you look at their origins. And similarly, when you look at what they are now, there's still traces of their origins there. Looking more closely at it, the main reason a compliant creature, like a hobgoblin, would end up in charge of their tribe is because of that supportive nature that hobgoblins share with folktale Hobs. If there's not a good leader for their military society, a hobgoblin's supportive nature causes the most fitting one to step up and take charge. Heck, this could even explain the reason why hobgoblins so often end up in charge of goblin tribes. They see their goblinoid cousins as lacking a sufficient leader with which to comply. But goblins themselves are too disruptive to be leaders. A goblin is more likely to strike out on its own like a folktale Gob, and meddle with other people if there isn't a leader reinforcing that compliant nature. So, hobgoblins tend to step in and support goblin tribes. But if there's a long enough period of time where goblins don't have a good leader, now that no one is making a goblin comply, it might choose to indulge in its meddling nature. The goblin will delight in wreckage. The louder and the more energetic and the more convoluted, the better. So the goblin ends up heading out to live solo, meddling where it pleases and pulling disruptive pranks for its own entertainment. And suddenly, it doesn't even feel like a goblin anymore. Now it feels like something closer to a folktale Gob. Gobs, meanwhile, aren't very likely to ever join a goblin tribe. They enjoy meddling too much. But if they get sick of being entirely alone, they might find a hearth of some kind. Steal some bread or some cream from the family living there, but support them a little by doing some chores. After all, if the Gob takes too much, then the family wouldn't have bread and cream for them to steal. And besides, the Gob still gets to meddle with the family, and before it knows it, that Gob is now a Hob. But we have to remember that if a Hob ever gets paid, if someone brings it to their attention that the Hob is actually wanted there, then they realize that their support isn't meddlesome, but it's simply complying with what people expect of it. And then the Hob will leave. If they're going to be supportive and compliant, they might as well do that for other goblinoids, not strangers. Looking at it like this, there's a clear separation between goblinoids, and we can see it comes down to their nature. It's a goblinoid's nature to meddle, just as much as it's in their nature to be compliant. Likewise, they are as pulled to being supportive as they are to being disruptive. The distinction between these goblinoids isn't their species, it's their morals. As Fae, their morals and nature are essentially one and the same, and if one would change, so would the other. Faes don't view the world in the same way humanoids would. Fae determine right and wrong based on their nature. Oftentimes when we talk about how humans measure morality, we say it's black or white, with some shades of gray in between. But other creatures have a completely different way of determining what is good or bad. This concept is known as blue and orange morality, where humanoids tend to judge good and evil on a scale of selfless to selfish, black and white. Fae would use something entirely different as their way to determine good and evil. My favorite example of blue and orange morality is to look at archfae. Oftentimes they're depicted as viewing the world through either honesty or dishonesty. No matter what an archfae does, as long as they're honest, in their society, they're seen as good, likable, and admirable. So given this context, even if an archfae tricked you into becoming his subservient warlock, made you kill your entire family, and now sends you out to do dangerous tasks for no reason other than his entertainment, so long as he didn't lie to you, others would see him as a paragon of virtue, kind of like how we see Superman. And as true as that is for Archfey, it's the same for Goblinoids, because both are Fey. We even have a tool in D&D to better understand and measure morality: the alignment chart.
Why you pulling me? I'm right.
The alignment chart is a tool for measuring morality, whether it's black and white or blue and orange. It measures these on two different axes: good and evil, lawful and chaotic. It can help to understand them if we think of it as right and wrong, and order versus freedom. For humanoids, good and evil, right and wrong, tend to be selfish or selfless. For lawful and chaotic, and order and freedom, it tends to be following the social contract or breaking it. But if we were to make an alignment chart for Goblinoids, we would have to use some sort of blue and orange morality. Good and right, evil and wrong for Goblinoids would be whether you are supportive or disruptive. Supportive being good, disruptive being wrong. Meanwhile, instead of law and order, chaos and freedom, Goblinoids are either compliant or meddling. Meddling Gobs and Hobs are rarer than their D&D counterparts which form tribes, because they give into that part of their nature that craves chaos and freedom. That isn't really conducive to growing a community like the compliant goblins and hobgoblins. Meanwhile, Hobs of both kinds tend to focus on being supportive, while Gobs of both kinds tend to cause disruptions. I know a lot of people hate alignment charts, and I get it. If you make alignment charts a requirement, it is annoying and sets arbitrary limitations that are way too opinion-based for it to be fun as a mechanic. Everyone will disagree on what is good or evil and the difference between lawful and chaotic. But as a guideline, an alignment chart can really help you find out what specifically works in your story. It can help you build out your character settings and plots. Especially when writing with Fae, it gives a cohesive method to their blue and orange madness. And yeah, that's basically Goblinoids. I hope you find a fun way to incorporate Hobs and Gobs into your D&D games. If you want tips on how to run goblins and hobgoblins in combat, you should check out this video from Sam over in Tabletop University. He released an amazing video breaking down what their stats mean for their combat tactics and their cultures. It's kind of a shame we don't have stats for Hobs and Gobs though, since they're just folktales and don't actually have any stats in D&D. Unless, of course, you look down in the description below, where you'll find a link for the document containing stats for both a Hob and a Gob. And, like always, it's 100% free. Thank you so much for watching this video. It has been a lot of work to do my first 3 videos in 1 week, but I love talking about D&D and good stories, and when it comes to Fae, there's just so much. Everything that's in these 3 videos was me cutting about 70% of my ideas. I have dozens of more ideas and partial scripts already in the works, so expect to see a lot more in the future. I'd like to give 2 final shoutouts for this week to both the creators of this event and to FableHollow. Ginny D and Pointy have made this an amazing week. I myself have already discovered a number of awesome creators, watching videos from the playlist whenever I had a moment in between recording, editing, and writing scripts. So if you want to see more awesome Fae content, or if you missed any of the previous days, go check out the playlist. And if you're the kind of person that likes to support a small business, check out FableHollow Coffee and Bookshop. Whether you go in person to enjoy the drinks and Fae vibes, or just order the ebooks and audiobooks online, I'm sure you'll be happy with your experience. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye!